Lord Cameron indicated that he was worried, as I said, that Israel might have broken international law, and he was very explicit about what he wanted from Israel next. There could not be a full ceasefire, he said, while Hamas was still able to fire rockets at Israel. But, he added, we believe there will not be true security either for Israel or the Palestinians without moving to a two-state solution. No ceasefire is really fully sustainable forever unless you fully have a political horizon. So what do the Israelis make of this position? Now, someone who I'm hoping can tell me is Mark Regev. He's a former Israeli ambassador to the UK and now senior advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Regev, welcome to the show and thanks for joining me. Can I ask, first of all, I don't know if you were able to catch any of the Foreign Secretary's evidence today, but he is clearly concerned that you have broken international humanitarian law. Can you respond to that, please?
So we are conducting our operation in accordance with the rules of armed conflict and international humanitarian law. We are very strict about that. Like the British, we have lawyers in the room where important decisions are made, and we make a very, very strong effort to maintain international law as we pursue this vicious, horrific enemy, Hamas, which was guilty of the most terrible war crimes and is still, until today, committing war crimes as it uses the people of Gaza as a human shield for its war machine.
So can you give me your position, your number on the collateral damage percentage that David Cameron was asked about?
I can say the following, and it's important to understand. You're a student of British history. You will know about Operation Carthage in March 1945, where the RAF targeted the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, Denmark. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, bombs went astray and over 100 civilians were killed in the area, including, I believe, 80-something children. Now, this is not a war crime. This is called a tragedy of war. You're endeavoring to hit a legitimate target, and the Danish underground was very interested in the British, the RAF, taking out that target, yes, the Gestapo headquarters. But if you inadvertently hit civilians, that's called an accident of war. That's not a war crime.
And there is a percentage around what you are trying to, as it were, achieve, or what's the maximum you can achieve. And you heard Alicia Kearns, the MP, saying that the British tended to work these days to 3%. Now, that particular attack is remembered very vividly in Denmark. In fact, there's been an entire film made about it. So it didn't pass without comment. But nonetheless, I come back to my question, what is the percentage for collateral damage to which you're working?
So I'm not sure about the percentage figure, but we do talk about, in military circles, they talk about a combat to civilian ratio.
All right.
What is an acceptable ratio?
Yes.
And my understanding is that when your country was involved in anti-terrorist operations, as the previous speaker said, against Daesh, against ISIS in places like Mosul and Fallujah, we were talking about 1 to 4, 1 to 5. That means for every terrorist killed there were up to 4 or 5, unfortunately, civilian casualties. My understanding of the Israeli numbers is that they are much lower than that. And when the dust settles from this conflict, when all the facts are out there, I believe it will be very apparent all the efforts the Israeli Defense Forces went to show our effort to try to keep civilians out of harm's way.
So let's return to the other thing that David Cameron said very forcibly, which is that he didn't think there could be any sustainable ceasefire until there was progress towards a two-state solution. The two-state solution couldn't be pushed off the table, in his view, both for the security of the people living inside Gaza, but also for the security of the Israeli state. How do you respond?
So I'd say to defeat Hamas is not just going to make Israelis safer, yes, to destroy their terror enclave in Gaza, but that's ultimately good for peace because Hamas represents the most violent and extreme opponents of peace and reconciliation. You know, Andrew, that Hamas says...
We both know also, Mr. Regev, that Prime Minister Netanyahu said that if you want to stop a two-state solution, you have to support Hamas. He was talking to a Likud meeting.
Andrew, that was misreported. No? That was misreported, and actually the reporter who wrote the article clarified recently that he did not say those remarks. That's I hate to say it; it's an urban myth.
Okay, well, let's
if I
dispose
can
of
make
the
the
urban
point
myth and return to the two-state solution, if we could. What is your reaction to the insistence that there must be a two-state solution or a political road towards one before there can be a proper peace?
Well, before there can be a proper peace, Andrew, we have to destroy Hamas. Because Hamas will destroy any chance we have of making peace with our Arab neighbors and our Palestinian neighbors. Hamas represents the most extreme and violent elements in the Arab world. Hamas says openly that my country has no right to exist in any borders. Hamas says openly that any Arab who signs a peace treaty with Israel is a traitor to Islam and to the Arab world. And we know what they think needs to be done to try. Yeah.
They certainly want to destroy Israel. That is absolutely clear. But once Hamas is defeated, do you not have to start to then move towards a two-state solution?
So when Hamas is defeated, I believe when we've defeated the most extreme enemy of peace and reconciliation, then there'll be space, I think, for more moderate voices to move ahead. Now, we have a formula that's a bit different from Lord Cameron's. Our formula is, and this is the Prime Minister of Israel's formula, that the Palestinians should have all the powers to rule themselves, while none of the powers that could harm Israel. Now, the second half of that formula, none of the powers to hurt Israel, that's, of course, much more important today after the October 7th massacre, because if I can take issue with something that your previous guest said, she said, I believe that Gaza was occupied by Israel. We're reoccupying Gaza because of this war. But we weren't in Gaza.
Law, that is true. Yeah.
No. It's really nitpicking, because in 2005, you'll recall, Ariel Sharon pulled out of the Gaza Strip. He took down all the settlements. The people there who didn't want to leave were forcibly removed. We pulled back to the 1967 line, which is the international community. I mean, how does one say Hamas controls Gaza and yet Israel occupies it? It's a logical contradiction. And so now we have to go
on the ground. Yeah. Things have changed rather on the ground in the last few weeks.
Correct.
I'm still trying to, with respect, hear you say that you agree that there must eventually be a two-state solution. Eventually.
Can I remind you of Yitzhak Rabin, who was the father of the Oslo process? No one doubts his sincerity and his desire to make a peace. And he was assassinated, as you recall, by a right-wing messianic fanatic who's in jail and I hope remains in jail for the rest of his life. He said in his last speech to the Knesset, when he talked about reconciliation with the Palestinians, he said the Palestinians would receive less than a state. And I think it's obvious, because he knew that such a state would have to be demilitarized, that such a state would have to be unable to sign, let's say, military pacts with countries like Iran and so forth. There would be restrictions on their sovereignty. And so I think the formula that I spoke about all the powers to govern themselves and yet none of the powers to threaten Israel, I think that's a safer terminology.
Well, I think many people will be picking over those words with great interest over the next few hours and days. Mr. Regev, thank you very much for talking to LBC tonight.